Welcome to Pasadena Monthly. I'm your host, Justin Chapman. After taking a look at what's been going on in Pasadena this past month, we'll speak with our guest, Pasadena Housing Director Bill Huang. But before we get started, let's check out these Pasadena media news briefs.
The Pasadena Museum of History is presenting Frozen Frames, Preserving Pasadena's Visual Legacy, as its premier online exhibition, hosted by the innovative Kunstmatrix platform. This exhibition offers a 3D showcase of artistically and historically significant photographs taken out of deep freeze and into public view, allowing viewers to explore Pasadena's visual heritage like never before. This exhibition unfolds in 4 parts, bringing to light images from over 200,000 at-risk negatives that have been cryogenically preserved as part of the museum's Great History Freeze project, launched in 2015. For more information about the exhibit, visit pasadenahistory.org/exhibitions. The 45th Annual Pasadena Doodah Parade will be held on Sunday, November 24th from 11 a.m. to approximately 12:30 p.m. in Old Pasadena, kicking off from Raymond Avenue and Holly Street. Produced by the Lightbringer Project and the Doodah Preservation Society, this year's parade promises a spirited lineup of art cars, eccentric vehicles, marching bands, and a variety of imaginative performers, including satirists, crooners, and costumed characters. Known as the Twisted Sister of the Rose Parade, Doodah has delighted audiences since 1978 with its mix of absurdity and satire. Following the parade, attendees are invited to the official Doodah After Party at Old Town Pub on North Fair Oaks Avenue for live music and festivities. Aspiring Doodah queens can also try out for the title on Sunday, October 27th at Old Town Pub. For more information, visit pasadenadoodahparade.info.
Let's turn next to our lightning round of news updates. 1. California is still counting votes, but most election results are in. Congressmember Adam Schiff will be California's next senator. Laura Friedman will replace him as the representative for Congressional District 30, and Judy Chu won re-election in District 28. Sasha Renee Perez will replace Anthony Portantino as Pasadena's state senator in District 25, and John Harabedian will replace Chris Holden as Pasadena's assembly member in District 41. Pasadena voters approved all of the local measures on the ballot, including the $195 million library bond, which means repairs and renovations at the Central Library will proceed as planned with an anticipated 2028 reopening date. They also voted for term limits for the mayor and council members, limiting them to 3 consecutive terms with an additional 2 terms after a 4-year break. Special elections for council member vacancies, the timing of organizational meetings, acting mayor position, vice mayor selection, rent control law adjustments to senior and disabled definitions and eviction rules, fire and police representation on the city's retirement board, and more were also approved. Voters also approved Pasadena Unified's parcel tax, which will fund STEAM programs and mental health services, and the bond measure, which would fund certain campus repairs and rental housing for teachers and staff, among other things. In the school board races, Jennifer Hall Lee won re-election to District 2. Tina Wu Fredericks won re-election to District 6, and Scott Harden was unopposed in District 4. In LA County, voters chose Nathan Hochman for DA and voted to expand the Board of Supervisors from 5 to 9 members after the 2030 census, to create an elected county CEO position by 2028, to create a county legislative analyst and director of budget and management positions, and to establish an ethics commission and a compliance officer by 2026. All that said, there are still 800,000 ballots yet to be counted across the state. 2. The Pasadena City Council authorized the city manager to sign an agreement to have the Rose Bowl be an official venue for men's and women's soccer semifinals and finals in the 2028 Olympic and Paralympic Games. That news was originally broken right here on Pasadena Monthly back in March by Rose Bowl CEO Jens Wyden. The Rose Bowl previously hosted Olympic events in 1932 and 1984. Also, the Council and the Pasadena Public Financing Authority approved a $130 million bond refinancing plan that will enable the Rose Bowl to restructure its debt payments through 2048. 3. JPL announced that it is laying off 325 employees, which is about 5% of its staff, and is actually lower than they anticipated months ago, but impacts all areas, including technical, project, business, and support staff. In a letter making the announcement, JPL Director Dr. Lori Leshin, who was a guest on this show in August 2023, said the layoffs are a result of a dynamic federal budget funding environment and are, quote, painful but necessary adjustments. After this action, it is believed that JPL will be in a stable condition to avoid any more layoffs for the foreseeable future. We want to assure you that JPL's future remains strong. In October, we successfully launched Europa Clipper to Jupiter's icy moon, and have lunar, astrophysics, and Earth missions scheduled for launch in early 2025, end quote. JPL also laid off about 530 employees earlier this year. 4, the council voted to change language in a draft resolution calling for Governor Newsom to recognize rising homeowner insurance rates. The original draft called on the governor to declare a state of emergency. The resolution now goes back to the council's Legislative Policy Committee. Several insurers have stopped issuing new homeowner insurance policies or have implemented significant rate increases due to the increasing frequency and severity of wildfires and other natural disasters due to climate change. 5, in light of the presidential election results and President-elect Trump's promise to conduct the largest mass deportation operation in American history, the City of Pasadena and PUSD issued a joint statement to reaffirm their shared commitment to safety and respect for all, regardless of race, immigration status, identity, or circumstance, and that PUSD schools are safe and protected spaces regardless of the immigration status or citizenship of students and their families. The statement also reaffirmed that local residents can continue to use city services without fear arising from their identity or status. The city has previously passed resolutions declaring that the city, including the police department, will not work with immigration and customs enforcement. And All Saints Church reaffirmed itself as a sanctuary church. 6, City Manager Miguel Marquez announced that Greg DeVink has been selected to be the city's next Public Works Director starting December 2nd. He previously served as the Public Works Director for the City of San Gabriel and worked in the Engineering Division for the City of Santa Monica. 7, ahead of the 2028 Olympics, Pasadena is accelerating a $51 million energy infrastructure upgrade, which will entail replacing 200,000 feet of major transmission lines that transfer more than half of the city's power load from the east and west sides of the city. The goal will be to complete the project by 2027 instead of 2031 as originally planned. Pasadena Water and Power Department reported that it has achieved 40% renewable energy generation, inching closer to the city's mandate of 100% carbon-free electricity by the end of 2030. PWP unveiled its optimized strategic plan, which outlines 3 scenarios: one using only currently available technologies like solar, wind, and battery storage, another incorporating emerging green hydrogen technology at the Glenarm Power Plant, and a third leveraging long-duration energy storage solutions still under development. And PWP is conferring with Caltech professors regarding the potential of rooftop solar. The city will track its progress through a new clean energy tracker dashboard that will be updated quarterly. 8, the city of South Pasadena closed escrow on 5 historic homes that were previously owned by Caltrans and has now placed them on the market. They will be sold at market rate, and the proceeds will be used to create affordable housing elsewhere in South Pasadena. Hundreds of people visited the homes during an open house last month, and hundreds more houses in South Pasadena, and LA, both occupied and unoccupied, remain under Caltrans ownership. Pasadena is in the process of purchasing 17 vacant properties. 9, city officials from Pasadena Fire, Police, Public Health, Housing, and Public Works led a meeting featuring the city's first comprehensive wildfire evacuation system called Genesis Protect, which uses artificial intelligence to provide early warnings to 3,000 residents in Western Hillsides neighborhoods. The model allows emergency officials to be laser specific in modeling a fire, predicting wind direction, fuels, topography, and the direction of the fire during specific periods of time. This will help them determine who will have to shelter in place and who will have to evacuate. Genesis Protect will launch early next year. And 10, the Pasadena Planning Department is considering making zoning changes to streamline the city's development review process and modify the pre-development plan review and design review procedures in order to comply with state housing laws while maintaining oversight of major projects. Let's welcome our guest, Pasadena Housing Director Bill Huang. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for having me.
Bill recently announced his retirement effective December 16th. Congratulations. He has been with the city since 2009. His work in affordable housing spanned over 30 years, first as an affordable housing developer and architect, and then in the public sector as the housing director for LA County and Pasadena. He led the West Coast real estate consulting and lending operations for the National Trust for Historic Preservation and was the deputy director of the nonprofit LA Community Design Center. He helped to establish several leading local nonprofit development corporations, including Hollywood and West Hollywood Community Housing Corporations, Heritage Housing Partners, and others. So, Bill, tell us a little bit more about your career and what led you to Pasadena ultimately.
Sure. Yeah, I think as an inflection point in my career, I was offered an opportunity to be the design principal, the design lead in one of the largest architectural firms here in LA. At the same time, there's an opportunity to work for a small nonprofit doing affordable housing development. And so much to my mother's chagrin, I chose the affordable housing route. And really because I felt like I wanted to have a career of service. And really having a good career. Now, as I look back, I consider my career a good career because I was able to do what I wanted to do and what was important to me, which was to be able to serve. So very quickly, I sort of focused on affordable housing, both as a developer and as an architect, and then eventually as a funder through LA County and City of Pasadena funder, sort of policy shaper of affordable housing. And so that's how I ended up here.
Great. And, housing's probably the number one issue on most people's minds, especially here in Southern California, something that impacts them directly. Is there enough affordable housing in Pasadena, and what can be done to create more?
Yeah, that's a real issue. I'm happy to say that I've been part of creating several thousand units of affordable housing here in Pasadena. Of course, not by myself, but whole team approach. But right now, as of today, about 10% of all the households in Pasadena live in some form of affordable housing, and that's important, and that's a good number. I think probably there are very other few cities that have that high of a percentage,
Sure.
but it's not enough, and we know that because we know the statistics that show more and more households are paying high percentages of their household incomes on housing, 40%, 50%, and more of their household income on housing. And that's unsustainable.
Yeah.
And then also we know from the affordable housing units and or rental subsidies that become available that the demand is so much more than the available supply. So we know that we need to do a lot more. So what can we do to build more or create more affordable housing? There's generally three ways that affordable housing is created. One is to subsidize it. So either subsidize the development of it or the rents, a household's rents, to make them affordable. Another way, and Pasadena does that. The problem is there's not enough subsidy to provide enough affordable housing for everybody who needs it. The other way is to require it. And so Pasadena, for instance, has a program called the Inclusionary Housing Program. So 20% of all the units in a multifamily apartment building or condominium building have to be set aside as affordable, or a large in lieu fee, can be paid instead. So requiring it is another way. And then the third way is to incentivize it. And so we see that with things like the density bonus. So there are density bonuses where if a developer, for instance, could build 100 units on a lot, if they agree to restrict 11% to very low income households, then they're allowed to build another 35 units. So they get 35 more units, but 11 of their units have to be restricted to very low income. So it's kind of a win-win. So society, the public gets these affordable units, and the developer gets more market rate units, which to further their business goals.
And Pasadena actually does more than a lot of other cities. I mean, that 20% is higher than most, right?
Yeah. In terms of the inclusionary program, yes. Most jurisdictions don't even have an inclusionary ordinance. So Pasadena does. It's been very, very effective. We have over 600 inclusionary units that have been built, so affordable housing units built through that program by the market rate developers. And then we have more than another 600 units that were subsidized by the fees that were paid by developers who paid the fee instead of building the units on site. That money comes to us, and then we use that to build more affordable housing. So it's been very productive. But Pasadena, we try to do a lot here. Maybe a good example would be our housing for our unhoused population. So in 2009, 2010, we had over 1,200 persons, unhoused persons, counted in our annual homeless count. Right. And that number was just increasing steadily, had been increasing steadily from year to year. And so we started to really look at what can we do differently to sort of bend that curve. And so I think there were three, really big decisions that we made that made a big difference. One was we started to focus on permanent housing because it may seem obvious now, but nothing ends homelessness except a home.
Right.
So you have to provide the permanent housing. It's above and beyond just providing a shelter, for instance, but permanent housing that ends people's homelessness. And then also we focused on homeless prevention. So prevent housed households from becoming homeless. It's better than waiting for them to become homeless and then trying to get them housed again. And then lastly, we built up homeless outreach teams. So outreach workers that would go out to those who were unhoused and build trust with them and then offer them services and housing. And we found that to be much more successful than our old model, which was to ask them to come to us and a kind of an intake model.
Right.
So instead of coming to us, we'll go to you. Because we found that those who were the most vulnerable, those who were the most in distress, being unhoused and living on the streets, were not coming into our intake center because they just couldn't or because they didn't think that there was anything in there to help them. So by making these three changes, very quickly over the next about 5 years, our homeless count number was cut in half. And it has remained there. So instead of climbing steadily, it went down and has remained down in the 500 to 600 person range, which is still way too many.
Sure.
But it is progress, and it's better than what it would be. We estimate probably it would be about 2,000 if we hadn't made those changes back in 2010, 2011 when we started to implement.
And related to that, what's the status of the bad weather shelter? Is that going to be an ongoing thing every year?
Yeah, we anticipate that it'll be an ongoing program. It's a hypothermia program. Bad weather shelter was started here, I believe, in the 1980s because there was in a particular cold winter, there were people who died of hypothermia throughout LA County, including at least one here in Pasadena. Right. And so a bad weather shelter was started just to get people off of the streets when it's very wet, when it's very cold during the winter months, so that they can survive.
Yeah.
And then that program has grown to include case management so that folks who come in, there's an opportunity now to connect them to services, ultimately connect them to housing. And so we have a bad weather shelter right now. It's at Trinity Lutheran Church here in Pasadena, one of our really good partners, faith-based partners here. And we expect it to open sometime in the new year, beginning right after the new year, and it runs for about 3 to 3.5 months during the coldest part of the winter.
Great. And there's been a big fight between the state and cities over some housing laws, such as SB 50, for example, and others that wrest some control away from local governments and ease the process of creating ADUs and that sort of thing, other density projects. Tell us about Pasadena's position on that, and also your thoughts on whether single-family residential neighborhoods will be able to be preserved in the long run, or if overpopulation and increased demand means that neighborhoods are on an inevitable path to higher density.
Well, I would say that Pasadena is very committed to preserving the character of the single-family neighborhoods, and yet also to produce as much housing as possible, both market rate housing, and especially affordable housing. So with regard to SB 50, so when SB 50 was first proposed, there was a delegation from Pasadena that went up to Sacramento to speak to the author, the bill author. And we said, we understand why the state wants to basically mandate the city's approval of housing projects, because a lot of cities were not doing that.
Sure.
But we've tried to point out to the author that Pasadena does do a tremendous amount of affordable housing, and yet we exert a lot of local control. So we do local control and we do housing. So there needs to be a separate category, instead of one size fits all of this bill that applies to all the cities as if they're the same, to recognize that there are some cities that are doing a good job of producing a good amount of housing and high quality housing. High quality housing comes from the local jurisdictions paying attention. And so we wanted sort of a separate category. There are certain cities, I would say Pasadena, Santa Monica, Glendale, among others, that are doing a lot of housing. And yet we know that there are other cities that are actively either not doing housing or trying to oppose additional housing. But unfortunately, we weren't successful in getting a carve out. And so working with Senator Portantino, we killed the bill. For 1 year, we delayed it for 1 to 2 years. When it came back the second time, it was modified, still not where we wanted it to be, but it was modified, and then ultimately it was approved. So Pasadena does follow the state law. So we follow SB 50, but we try to approve housing quickly and thoughtfully, and not put up artificial barriers. On the other hand, you know, there was a lot of accessory dwelling unit legislation that came down from the state. So the state had a ADU law that required local jurisdictions to have an ADU ordinance, and many jurisdictions had ordinances, but some, including Pasadena's, was written in a way that it didn't produce very many affordable housing units. It was very, very narrow. For instance, Pasadena's ADU ordinance said you could only have an ADU if your lot was 15,000 square feet or larger.
Wow.
That's 3 times the size of the standard lot. And I believe about only 5% or less than 5% of the single family lots in Pasadena meet that 15,000 square foot requirement. So, and we know that, you know, why do people build ADUs? Usually it's because they either need the space or because they need rental income.
Right.
But chances are, if you're living on a house in a 15,000 square foot lot, it's probably a nice estate, and you probably don't need either. So during the 10 plus years that law was on the books, there were only 2 ADUs that were permitted during the whole time. So in 2016, 2017, the state started to say, no, you have to have a more reasonable ADU law, made it statewide, so it applied to Pasadena. And since 2017, there have been a couple hundred ADU permits that have been issued, and many, many, many that have been built.
Right.
And so Pasadena's kind of been on both sides of the table, but we do want to produce housing, and we do follow state law.
So a few Caltrans homes in South Pasadena have just hit the market. Tell us about the 17 vacant Caltrans houses that Pasadena is in the process of buying. What's the status of that? When do you anticipate seeing those offered to the public, and then talk about the few that might be affordable housing as well?
Yeah. So as we know, Pasadena has had dozens of vacant Caltrans homes here. Of course, Caltrans owns hundreds of units. Most of them are occupied, but they've also had dozens that were just vacant and sitting there vacant. And vacant homes are not good for any neighborhood. No. Sit there for decades, right? It's not good for any neighborhood. So we worked with Senator Portantino to pass a bill a couple years ago that requires Caltrans to sell their vacant Caltrans homes in Pasadena to the city of Pasadena for affordable housing. And so what that means, and they have to sell it to us at their original purchase price, which was very low because they've owned these homes for many decades. So the way that affordable housing is produced is either some of those homes could be used as affordable housing, or the homes could be sold as is at market rate, and then the net proceeds would go into an affordable housing fund and would be used to produce affordable housing. So right now we have 14 homes under escrow. 3 more are on the way. Caltrans has told us there's 3 more that are coming, so we expect to have 17. So we are in. So the city is in escrow with Caltrans. When we close escrow, then we need to come with a disposition plan. So we haven't come forward to City Council yet on a disposition plan, but we suspect that probably the majority of the units would be sold as is, and then a handful of the units would be sold to a nonprofit affordable housing developer at less than market rate to be used for affordable housing, most likely affordable first-time homebuyer units.
With the, if I remember correctly, with the Pasadena preference,
yes.
Homebuyer preference.
Yes, all of our affordable housing in Pasadena uses a Pasadena preference.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, and as a result, almost all the affordable housing here in Pasadena is used by Pasadena
Gotcha.
tenants,
Okay.
Pasadena residents. Yeah.
And we know there are a number of other vacant Caltrans homes in Pasadena. Do we know, are those going to be eventually sold to Pasadena, or has Caltrans said what their plans for those other vacant houses?
We only have some sort of indirect information on that Caltrans has said they're holding some vacant homes back as replacement housing. We don't know exactly what they mean as replacement housing, but we think maybe it's that folks who are in a unit that is in very poor condition might be offered another unit that's in better condition to replace their unit in bad condition, and then maybe then that unit gets offered to the city in the future. We're not sure.
Gotcha.
But we know that we're moving forward on 17, and that looks really good. And we suspect that the escrow with the city will close, I would guess, around maybe February, maybe February of next year. And then right away, if city council agrees, that we would turn around and then offer them to home buyers at that point.
And Bill, finally, what the next housing director that comes in, what are the most pressing things they're going to have to work on right away when they assume office?
Well, fortunately, we have a really full pipeline of affordable housing projects and programs. We have a safe parking program that we're working to stand up with All Saints Church. We have several projects under construction, so those need to get finished, affordable housing projects under construction. And then we have several sites that have been city-owned sites that have been dedicated for affordable housing. So moving those forward and producing housing, those have the potential to produce several hundred more units. And then, there's always the need to look for more resources. As I said, subsidizing housing is one way to produce the affordable housing, but finding the subsidy and figuring out how to access that and to use it is always a challenge. Fortunately, with Measure A that passed with LA County, that will give us, we know that we will be able to secure some of that funding for affordable housing and homeless services here in Pasadena. But there's always a need for more, and so that person needs to continually look out for resources, affordable housing opportunities. That's what I've been doing for 15 years, and that part doesn't stop.
Yeah. Well, Bill, thank you so much for taking the time, coming on the show, telling us about your career and your work. I really appreciate it, and congrats on your retirement.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Justin. Really appreciate it.
Take care. Before we go, here is this month in Pasadena history. It was this month in 1969 when the PCC campus was a hotbed of anti-war activity, including a 3-day moratorium starting on November 13th to protest America's involvement in the Vietnam War. As a PCC history report points out, most of the male students at PCC were eligible to be drafted and sent to Vietnam, but would receive exemptions if they were enrolled in college. The campus held an anti-war film festival, an evening prayer vigil, debates on the merits of the war, and students wore armbands to express their sympathies. One of the debates was held in the football stadium because of the level of interest. It featured 2 political science professors, Dr. Steve Reichart, who was against involvement in the war, and Dr. Richard Vetterli, who supported the war. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of Pasadena Monthly. Tune in every 4th Friday of the month at 5 p.m. Learn more at pasadenamedia.org and justindouglaschapman.com. Drop me a line at jchapman@cityofpasadena.net. We'll see you next time.